Hello, this is a video about HTML5. So like I've mentioned before, HTML5 is the current standard of HTML. So what are current standards? Basically, HTML, when you go through the years, they introduce things to meet the needs of current day web design. Okay, and what some of those things are come in forms of tags or elements. Okay, as we have new things that are implemented into web pages, we need new elements to deal with them. Okay, new things like videos, blogs, etc., like I mentioned before. Now, in the past, people used workarounds to kind of deal with things that they needed. And one of the things that people used quite often is divs. Okay, divs are very useful, very handy because they just make divisions of things, right? Div for the top of your page as a header, div navigation bar, div main section, div footer, right? You can divide your page into those sections, okay? But that's basically what they were. They were just divisions, okay? But somewhere along the line, somebody said, we need to give more meaningful descriptions to things, right? They're not just divisions, right? They're specific divisions, right? You could even argue that a paragraph is a division, right? Can you imagine saying that I need to use div ID equals paragraph or div ID equals H1? That'd be pretty strange, right? Those are so common in our web design that they have dedicated elements, right? H1, H2, paragraphs, they all have dedicated elements because they're things that we use. So since almost all web pages nowadays have navigation, footer, header, these things, why not give them their own dedicated element? Okay, so that's what HTML5 introduced into modern web design, is getting rid of some of the divs and replacing them with their own elements. Now, you can still use divs. There's nothing wrong with it, okay? So feel free to go ahead and use those if you're used to it. But it does give us another tool to kind of give more meaningful coding, okay? So now, your typical page usually has these types of things: a header, navigation, main content, footer. So they said, let's just make elements that can do those things, okay? And they created those actual elements. Okay, let's take a look in your book of how they actually do this, or comparison of the two methods. Okay, now there's no like, I wouldn't say one way is better. Okay, HTML is kind of better because it's more meaningful, but practically speaking, you can achieve the same results using both divs and HTML5. And if you have already used divs and don't feel comfortable changing, feel free to just keep working with your divs. Okay, so in your textbook, they have a web page that looks kind of like this. Oops, sorry. So here is a typical looking web page with a header, footer, and some content. Okay, it's missing the navigation bar, but they put that in later. And if you go down to the code, here you can see the actual divisions of these things. Okay, so maybe I'll zoom out just a touch so you can see all of it. Okay, so here you can see all the divisions: div ID header, div drinks, div main, div sidebar, div footer, right? A bunch of divs, because that's what we're doing. We're dividing the page into sections. Okay, and with HTML5, instead of divs, they have these dedicated elements, right? Your header element, your footer element, section elements, aside elements, and they can be given IDs. This is what it looks like in the code. Okay, so you can see that originally using divs, right, they get replaced, or not replaced, but you can use instead the header element, the footer element, instead of div, right? Instead of this ID sidebar, they use this aside. Okay, and this is what the CSS looks like. So instead of styling ID header, you're styling just the header itself, right? Instead of styling ID footer, you're styling the footer itself. Okay, so just kind of like a future trend, let's say. Okay, there's still a lot of people using divs out there, but they're kind of leaning towards making things a little bit more meaningful when people code. Okay, so keep that in mind. And like I said before, if you're more comfortable with the divs, maybe some of you have already done a lot of coding using divs and you don't feel like changing it, that's completely fine for the scope of this course. Okay. And also, if you do feel like using them, go ahead and use these new tags if you want.